So after preparing very nicely the attack, Black found a very fantastic finish, and here he played the absolutely brilliant bishop to g1. Some of the nicest games I've ever seen are actually not games played by top players or popular players. In today's video, I wanted to share with you a game that I came across where we're going to see a very beautiful attack with a beautiful finish. So as said, the players are not well known. Playing as Black, we have Luis Cabral, who was champion of Uruguay a few times. That's why this game is also known as the Uruguayan Immortal. So let's get started with the game. Here after the move d4, knight to f6, knight to f3, d5, c4, and c6, we get a Slav defense. And after knight to c3, here Black played a somewhat strange move. Black went knight b to d7. This is a common move, but not in this particular position. Here Black could have played something like e6 or even taken on c4. But knight b to d7 will transpose into main lines. Just to mention a subtle point, here White actually had an interesting idea of taking on d5, because after pawn takes we get this exchange variation where the knight has already committed to d7. So in this position, Black would prefer to develop the knight to c6 instead of d7. But instead here White went e3, and after e6, now we get a fairly standard position. Now Black is ready to capture with the e-pawn if White takes on d5 with the c-pawn. And after bishop to d3, Black took on c4, and after pawn takes, here Black played the move b5. This is a very common idea in the Slav. White went bishop to e3, which is the most common reply, bishop to e2, and now Black played the move a6, preparing to go c5, fighting for the center and preparing to develop the bishop to b7. So here after White castled, c5, here White went b3, which is possible, but I didn't like White's follow-up. White has other alternatives like a4, which White will play later in the game, or queen to e2, but White decided to go b3, and after bishop to b7, now White played the move queen to e2. If I had this position, I would probably be more consistent and went bishop to b2 sooner or later, which White never played in the game. Otherwise, I don't understand the move b3 a lot. But White went queen to e2, and after queen to b6, rook to d1, bishop to e7, we have a fairly balanced position. White went a4, which is a typical idea since Black expanded on the queen side. Now White wants to counterattack these pawns, and the main idea is that after b4 and knight to b1, this might seem like a passive move, but the knight is now going to c4, which has become a weak square. So here Black went rook to c8, and after knight b to d2, c takes d4, before taking on d4, White went knight to c4, attacking the queen, and after queen to a7, knight takes d4, Black castled. So far we have a relatively quiet game. Both sides are simply developing, and here White went bishop to d2, eyeing this pawn on b4, and White might have ideas to play on the queen side. For example, knight to a5, and then putting pressure on the pawn on a6 is an idea. That's why Black went a5. This also overprotects the pawn on b4, but on the other hand, this allows White to go knight to b5, which attacks the queen, and it also eyes this d6 square. But here Black went queen to a8. Even though this queen might look strange on a8, it is combining with the bishop, so they form a battery, and they are eyeing the pawn on g2. So this move queen to a8 is actually very strong. And here White should have prevented this idea and go f3, and we get a fairly balanced position where both sides have their advantages. White have these very active knights, but on the other hand, Black also has very active pieces. But instead, White went knight b to d6, which on one hand it makes sense because White is happy to trade one of his knights for this very strong bishop on b7. White is also attacking the rook on c8, so if the rook moves, White might take on b7. But Black's idea is to sacrifice an exchange after taking this pawn on g2, knight takes and rook takes. So in return for the exchange, Black is getting this very important pawn on g2, which was protecting White's king. So this is going to be a long-term compensation. White is going to have a weaker king, so Black has a lot of compensation in this position. In fact, White already has to be very careful. White even has this idea of going bishop to f3, attacking the queen and the rook. so black can even get the material back fairly quickly. And just to show you how complicated white's position is, here white's best defense was to go e4, trying to complicate the position even by giving this pawn e4. Because after rook to e1, black still played bishop to f3, and after queen to f1, queen to d5, black is already having this huge threat of going queen to g5. So here white tried e4, which in this case is very necessary. Now queen to g5 is not possible because the bishop is controlling g5. And here black could have even taken this pawn e4, for example after knight takes e4. In this case we'll probably not be analyzing this game because black played another very brilliant idea. By the way, here queen to h5 was also very good, just bringing pieces to the king side to attack white's king, which is exposed. But here black played the very brilliant rook takes e4. And the idea is actually quite deep, we're going to see it later. But first of all, let's rule out some options for white. Taking the queen, which is very tempting, is actually leading to a checkmate after rook to g4. White doesn't have anything better than giving the queen. But even after that, if the king goes to h1, rook to g3 is a checkmate, or after king to f1 and rook takes, there's no way to prevent this checkmate. So taking the queen is not an option. If white takes on c4 with the bishop, then here black can take the bishop on d2 and black is still attacking. So that leaves us with b takes e4. And now black went queen to h5. So black has sacrificed two exchanges with the idea to attack white's king. And black is not forcing a checkmate in one or two moves. So what I really like about this game, that besides some very concrete and accurate moves, black has a great understanding about how to attack. Black is simply going to bring pieces to attack white's king. And even though black sacrificed two exchanges, black has a lot of pieces that could potentially attack white's king. And the idea of sacrificing on c4 was to remove a knight on c4 that was controlling these very important squares. So it was a very deep and conceptual sacrifice. So here white tried queen to f4 because queen to g4 was a big threat. Now white wants to go bishop to g3 if black goes queen to g4. But instead black brought more pieces and went knight to g4. Now I just want to mention another very nice idea that black had in this position, which is the move bishop to d6. So remember that the knight on c4 was controlling the d6 square. In this case, there's no knight to capture on d6. And if white captures on d6, then after e5, now the bishop has been cut off and it cannot defend h2 or it cannot go back to g3. So in this position, black has a winning attack, even after sacrificing more material, because queen to g4 is actually a very big threat. And if white tries h3, then we're gonna get very similar ideas to the ones that we saw in the game. But knight to g4 is a very natural move, just bringing another piece to the attack. Here white tried to trade some pieces, which makes sense. Black has the idea to go knight d to e5 and even bring the bishop to c5. If white goes h3, this actually doesn't threaten anything, so here white is wasting time, because after taking on g4, queen to h1 will lead to a checkmate. So bishop to e2 makes some sense. In any case, black has a winning position with correct play. Black went knight d to e5, simply bringing another piece. And now black has more concrete ideas. Here white tried h3, but other alternatives would also be good for black. For example, after taking on e5, queen takes e5 is actually quite strong because we attack on h2. And even though white can defend with queen to h3 after bishop takes, black is winning material because white cannot take on e2 without losing the rook on a1. Taking on f3 was another alternative, and after knight takes, black has three pieces attacking on h2, but here white could have tried king to g2 with the idea to go queen to h1 after black captures on h2. But even here black has a very nice idea, which is to go g5, actually bringing another piece to the attack, and after bishop g3, black can take on h2 and then go g4. For example, after queen to h1, g4, and after bishop takes and queen to h3, we get this very pretty checkmate with a queen, a pawn and a knight. And if white waits in this position, for example after rook a to d1, black actually has a big threat here, which is to take on h2, and after bishop takes, go knight to g4. There's no good way to prevent queen to h2 or queen to h1. So black tried h3 mainly to prevent knight takes h2 because taking on g4 here is not a threat, because after queen to h1 we get a checkmate. So black simply brought another piece to the attack, so all the black pieces are ready to attack the king on g1. Now there's the idea to take on f2, so white went bishop to g3. And now black started playing a series of spectacular moves. First, he took on f2, and after bishop takes, queen to g5, and after king to h2 and bishop to f4, bishop to g3 is the only logical move, since after king to g1 we get queen to g3, the bishop on f2 is pinned, so we're gonna get a checkmate after queen to g2 and queen takes. So black tried bishop to g3, so after preparing very nicely the attack, black found a very fantastic finish, and here he played the absolutely brilliant bishop to g1. Simply defecting either the king or the queen from the squares. If the king takes, then we get an easy checkmate after queen takes. Or after queen takes, the main idea is to drive the queen away from h3, since black can now play another sacrifice, knight to g4, and in this position white resigned because after pawn takes, there's no other alternative. Queen to h6, now white doesn't have queen to h3 because the queen has been driven to g1, and after bishop to h4 and queen takes, we get this very pretty checkmate. So I hope that you enjoyed this game where black really combined a very good understanding of how to attack with very concrete calculation and accurate play. If you want to get better at chess and understand other ideas like how to play endings or how to analyze your games, I have a free training plan for that you can find in the description. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.